He divorced his poor black wife for a woman he called perfect. But the day their son was born, he refused to hold him, because the child's face looked exactly like the past they both spent years trying to erase. What he didn't know was that perfect woman was someone his ex-wife had known for years, someone who rebuilt her entire face to escape who she used to be. And that baby? He wasn't just their son. He was the one thing no surgery, no money, no lies could ever change. And when Marcus finally called his ex-wife, his voice was shaking, because the more he looked at his son, the more he realized something was terribly wrong. But what she told him next wasn't just the truth about the child, it was the truth about him, the life he ran from, and the mistake he could never undo. And by the time he understood what he had done, everything he traded his life for was already falling apart. Before I tell you what happened next, I'm curious. Where are you watching this from? And what time is it for you right now? Comment below because I read every single comment. Marcus didn't leave his wife with a fight. He left her with silence and divorce papers waiting on the kitchen table. The rain tapped softly against the narrow windows of their third-floor apartment, a steady rhythm that made the space feel even smaller than it was. Isabella Johnson stood at the stove, her back straight despite the ache in her shoulders, stirring a pot she had already overcooked. She was 34, a black woman with deep, smooth skin and tightly coiled natural hair pulled into a loose bun, a few strands clinging to her temples from the heat. Her face carried a quiet kind of beauty, the kind people noticed only if they took the time to really look. But lately, no one did, especially not Marcus. She worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3 when rent felt heavier than usual. Days at a grocery store, nights cleaning office buildings long after the lights went out and the world forgot those spaces existed. Her hands were rough, her nails short and practical, her body always just a little too tired. But she never complained, because survival didn't leave room for softness. Still, she cooked. Still, she set the table. 2 plates, 2 forks, 2 glasses, as if routine could fix what silence had already broken. But tonight felt different, and she didn't know why yet. Marcus Johnson hadn't always been this way. At 36, he still carried the presence of a man people naturally made space for. Tall, broad, his shoulders filling doorways like he belonged in better places. His skin was dark and even-toned, his jaw sharp, his beard always trimmed just enough to look intentional. He used to smile easily, used to laugh like life hadn't already started weighing him down. Back when they had nothing, he had everything, because he had her. But something changed, not loudly, not suddenly, just slowly. He started coming home later, started dressing better than their life could afford, started speaking less, until words between them became something rare, almost awkward. And the worst part? He didn't seem angry. He just didn't seem there anymore. The clock on the wall ticked past 8:47 p.m. Isabella glanced at it, then at her phone, her thumb hovering before she finally pressed call. Ring, ring, ring. Each tone stretched longer than it should have. Then voicemail. She lowered the phone slowly, her chest tightening, not from surprise, but from something worse. Recognition. She typed anyway. Dinner's ready. I'm waiting. The message delivered, not read. She stood there for a moment, staring at the screen, before placing the phone face down like it had done something wrong. Then she adjusted his plate, just slightly, because maybe it still mattered. 9:58 p.m. The food had gone cold. The apartment felt too quiet, the kind of silence that made every small sound feel louder, the hum of the fridge, the distant cars outside, the faint drip from the kitchen sink she kept meaning to fix. And that's when the thought came, soft, uninvited. This is the last time you're doing this for him. She blinked, shook it off, picked up her fork anyway. At 10:21 p.m., the door unlocked. Marcus stepped in without hesitation, shaking the rain from his jacket, his movements efficient, detached. He looked different. Not just tired, not just distracted. Different. His shirt was crisp, perfectly pressed. His shoes were clean, too clean for the kind of work he claimed to be doing. And there was that scent again, expensive, sharp, out of place. For a second, Isabella watched him, hoping. "Hey," she said softly. Marcus didn't look up. "You're still up." Not warm, not cold, just empty. "I made dinner," she said, gesturing toward the table. He glanced at it, briefly, then back at his phone. "I already ate." And that was it. No apology, no explanation. Just a sentence that erased everything she had done that night. Isabella nodded once. "Okay." But inside, something shifted. Not broke, not yet. Just moved, like a crack forming beneath the surface. Marcus walked past her, his shoulder brushing hers without even noticing. He didn't slow down, didn't pause, didn't look back. The bedroom door closed behind him with a soft click, but somehow it felt louder than a slam. Isabella stood there, staring at the empty chair across from hers. Then she sat down, picked up her fork, took a bite of cold food, chewed slowly, because what else was she supposed to do? Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Time didn't feel real anymore. Finally, she stood, cleared the table, washed the dishes, wiped every surface like she always did. Careful, precise, controlled. Because if she stopped moving, she might start thinking. And if she started thinking, she might realize something she wasn't ready to face. But the thought came anyway. He's already gone. Not physically, but in every way that mattered. Later that night, as she walked past the kitchen on her way to bed, something caught her eye. A stack of papers, neatly placed, too deliberate to be random. She stopped, her heart slowed. Not faster, slower, like it already knew. Step by step, she moved closer, her fingers hovering just above the top page before finally pressing down. The paper didn't shake. Her hands didn't tremble. Not yet. She read the first word, then the second, then the third. Divorce. Her breath caught, but not because of the word, because of something else, something colder. She flipped the page, looked at the date, and in that moment, everything inside her went completely still. He had signed it 3 days ago, before he ever stopped coming home. 2 weeks after the divorce papers appeared, Marcus finally showed her why he had already moved on. The message came at 9:12 p.m., just as Isabella was finishing another late shift, her body heavy with exhaustion, but her mind sharper than it had been in years. Her phone buzzed once in her hand, a single notification that felt louder than it should have. Unknown number. No name, no warning. Just a photo. She opened it. Marcus stood in the center, taller than she remembered, dressed in a charcoal-tailored suit that fit his frame like it had been made for a different version of him, one that no longer belonged to her world. His posture was confident, almost proud, his arm wrapped around a woman standing close enough to claim him without hesitation. The woman was flawless. Her skin was smooth and luminous, pale with a soft golden undertone that caught the light like polished glass. Her blonde hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders, perfectly styled but not overly done, the kind of effortless beauty people spent hours trying to achieve. Her jawline was sharp, her nose delicate, her lips full in a way that looked natural, her eyes bright and controlled, like someone who had practiced how to be seen. And then there was the caption, "I finally found the life I deserve." Isabella didn't react immediately. She didn't gasp, didn't cry. She just stared. Because something about that face didn't sit right. Not the beauty, the familiarity. Her fingers tightened slightly around the phone as her mind began pulling pieces together, memories surfacing from places she hadn't visited in years. A classroom, fluorescent lights, whispers in the back row. And then, a girl. Vanessa. Vanessa Clark had never been invisible, but she had always wished she was. She had been tall for her age, awkward in the way her limbs didn't quite match her posture, her shoulders slightly hunched as if she were constantly trying to make herself smaller. Her skin had been uneven, marked by stubborn acne that makeup never fully covered, her nose wider, her teeth slightly crooked in a way that made her smile hesitant and brief. But it wasn't just her appearance that people noticed. It was how she carried it. Vanessa moved through the world like she was apologizing for existing. She avoided eye contact, spoke softly, laughed only when necessary. And people noticed weakness. Isabella remembered the way others used to whisper about her, the quiet jokes, the sideways glances. She had never joined in, but she had never stepped in either. Back then, survival meant staying out of things that weren't yours. But Vanessa had always been watching, not reacting, just observing. And now, this woman in the photo was her. Isabella zoomed in slowly, her breath steady but her chest tightening as she studied the details. The symmetry was different, the angles sharper, the skin smoother, the eyes slightly lifted. Everything was refined, engineered, perfected. She changed everything, Isabella whispered to herself, but not in admiration, in understanding. Marcus didn't know. He couldn't. Because Marcus had never seen Vanessa back then. Not really. She had been invisible to people like him, the kind of man who only noticed presence when it demanded attention. And now, Vanessa demanded attention. Another message came through, this time text. "You see it now?" Isabella stared at the screen, her face unreadable. She didn't reply. Instead, she locked her phone and slipped it into her bag, her movements calm, controlled. Around her, the city moved like nothing had changed. Cars passing, people talking, life continuing as if her entire past hadn't just been rewritten in a single image. But inside, something was shifting. The next morning, Isabella sat across from someone she hadn't spoken to in years, Lena Brooks. Lena had been Vanessa's closest thing to a friend back in high school, though friend was always a complicated word. She was a black woman like Isabella. But where Isabella was quiet strength, Lena was sharp edges. Tall and slender, with dark brown skin that seemed to glow under any light, her hair now cut into a sleek, shoulder-length style, her eyes quick and observant. Lena had always been the kind of person who saw things others missed, and wasn't afraid to say them. "I knew it was her the second you sent me the picture," Lena said, leaning back in her chair, her tone calm but certain. "Nobody changes that much by accident." Isabella said nothing, her fingers wrapped loosely around a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. "She left after graduation," Lena continued. "Moved to California first, then New York. Heard she started working in some art circles. Then came the surgeries." "Surgeries?" Isabella asked, though she already knew the answer. Lena nodded. "Not one, not two, everything. Nose, jaw, skin treatments, teeth, probably more. Took years, money too. But she didn't just change her face. She leaned forward slightly. She changed her entire life. Isabella's eyes flickered up. "What do you mean?" Lena studied her for a moment before answering. "I mean, Vanessa didn't just want to be pretty," she said quietly. "She wanted to be someone else." The words lingered, heavy, uncomfortable, true. Isabella thought back to the photo again. The way Vanessa stood, the way she looked directly into the camera, the confidence, the control. That wasn't the girl from the back of the classroom. That was someone who had built herself, piece by piece. "But why Marcus?" Isabella asked, more to herself than to Lena. Lena didn't hesitate. "Because Marcus is exactly the kind of man she would choose." Isabella frowned slightly. "Ambitious," Lena continued, "restless. Not satisfied with where he came from. Men like that, they don't just want success. They want to be seen succeeding." She paused. "And Vanessa? She's the perfect reflection of that." Silence settled between them. Not awkward, just complete. For the first time, Isabella felt something she hadn't expected. Not anger, not jealousy, clarity. Marcus hadn't just left her, he had upgraded his reflection. That night, Isabella sat alone in her apartment again, the same table, the same chair, but everything felt different now. The illusion was gone. The confusion had settled into something sharper, something easier to understand. She picked up her phone again, opened the photo, looked at Vanessa's face one more time. Perfect. Yes, but not real. And then Isabella noticed something she hadn't seen before, something small, something most people would miss. Vanessa's smile. It didn't reach her eyes. Isabella leaned back slowly, her lips pressing together as a quiet realization formed. This wasn't over. Not even close. Marcus didn't just leave his wife. He traded his entire life for something he thought looked better. The first time Isabella saw the house, it wasn't in person. It was through a screen, bright and polished, posted like a trophy for the world to admire. The image appeared on social media under a new account Marcus had clearly made to separate himself from everything he used to be. The house stood on a quiet hill, all glass windows and clean white walls, the kind of place that didn't just hold wealth, but announced it. A sleek black car sat in the driveway, reflecting the sunlight like a mirror, and in front of it stood Marcus, smiling. Really smiling. Isabella stared at the image longer than she should have, because she hadn't seen that smile in years. Standing beside him was Vanessa, her posture straight, her expression composed, one hand resting lightly on his arm as if she had always belonged there. But this time, Isabella noticed something new. Not just the perfection, but the precision. Vanessa didn't just look beautiful. She looked curated. A second photo followed, this one indoors. A long dining table, polished wood, set with expensive plates and crystal glasses. At the head sat a man Isabella had never seen before, but instantly understood. Richard Clark, Vanessa's father. Richard was a man in his late 60s, his presence unmistakable even in a still image. His skin was a deep bronze, aged but well kept, his hair silver and closely cropped, his face defined by sharp lines that spoke of decades spent making decisions others had to follow. His eyes were narrow, calculating, the kind that didn't miss anything, and his posture, straight-backed, composed, suggested a lifetime of control. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. Men like him didn't seek approval. They expected it. Next to him sat a woman with a softer presence, but no less authority, Evelyn Clark, Vanessa's mother. She was tall and elegant, her skin smooth, her features refined, her hair styled into a flawless bob that framed her face with precision. Her expression carried a quiet judgment, the kind that didn't need words to be felt. She looked at the table, at the arrangement, at the people around her, not with warmth, but with assessment. This wasn't a family dinner. This was a display. And Marcus? He sat among them like he had finally arrived. Isabella's fingers tightened slightly as she scrolled, because now she understood. This wasn't love. This was a transaction. Later that evening, another message came through. This time, not from Marcus, from an unknown number again, but the tone was different, more deliberate. "You should see how well he fits in." Isabella stared at the text, her expression unchanged. Then, slowly, she typed back, "Who is this?" A few seconds passed, then a reply, "Someone who knows what Vanessa really is." Isabella's breath didn't hitch, but her attention sharpened. "Explain." There was a pause, longer this time. Then a message came through, followed by an image. The image wasn't recent. It was old, grainy, taken under harsh fluorescent lights. Vanessa, not the version from the polished photos, the real one. Or at least, the one she used to be. Her hair was shorter, unstyled, her face uneven, her skin marked, her eyes uncertain. She stood slightly off to the side in what looked like a gallery space, her posture guarded, her hands clasped together like she wasn't sure where to place them. But what stood out wasn't how she looked. It was how she was looking at someone else in the frame. Marcus. Younger, less refined, but unmistakably him. Isabella's eyes narrowed, because this wasn't just coincidence anymore. The phone buzzed again. She didn't choose him by accident. Isabella leaned back slightly, her mind moving faster now, connecting pieces she hadn't even realized were there. "Then why?" she typed. The reply came almost instantly. Because he was already trying to become someone else. Silence settled over the room. Isabella looked back at the photo. Marcus, standing there years ago, unaware he was being watched, not just by the camera, but by Vanessa. Studied. Selected. A memory surfaced. Marcus talking late at night about wanting more, about hating where he came from, about not wanting to be that guy forever. And Vanessa, she had heard all of it. She built herself, Isabella whispered. Another message appeared, and then she built the life she wanted around her. Isabella exhaled slowly, because now the picture was clear. Marcus didn't find Vanessa. Vanessa found Marcus. Across the city, in a home far removed from everything Isabella knew, Marcus stood in front of a mirror, adjusting his tie for the third time. The reflection looking back at him was exactly what he had always imagined: sharp, confident, successful. But his hand paused, just for a second, because behind him, in the doorway, Vanessa stood watching. Perfect, silent, unreadable. "You're overthinking it," she said softly, her voice smooth but controlled. Marcus forced a small smile. "Just want to get it right." Vanessa stepped closer, adjusting his collar with careful precision. "You already have everything," she said. Her fingers lingered for a moment longer than necessary. "Just don't lose it." Marcus nodded, but something about the way she said it didn't feel like reassurance. It felt like a warning. Back in her apartment, Isabella set her phone down slowly, her thoughts settling into something sharper than anger. Understanding. Marcus hadn't just left her for something better. He had been chosen for something bigger. And people like Vanessa didn't choose without a reason. Isabella leaned back, her eyes drifting toward the window as the city lights flickered in the distance. Because if Vanessa had built this life so carefully, then there was something in it that wasn't meant to be seen. Marcus knew something was wrong the moment the nurse placed the baby in his arms. The hospital room was too bright, washed in sterile white light that made every detail impossible to ignore. The faint beeping of machines blended with the distant footsteps in the hallway, but none of it registered the way the weight of the child did. Small, warm, real. For a second, Marcus smiled, because this was it, the final piece, the life he had chased, sacrificed for, rebuilt from nothing, now complete in his hands. A son. Marcus Johnson stood tall even in stillness, his broad shoulders slightly tense beneath a perfectly fitted coat he had refused to remove, despite the warmth of the room. His beard was trimmed clean, his hairline sharp, his entire presence controlled the way he had learned to present himself in the new world he had entered. To anyone watching, he was a man who had succeeded. But as he looked down, something shifted. The baby's face was scrunched slightly, eyes barely open, skin still adjusting to the air outside the womb. Nothing unusual, nothing obvious, and yet, Marcus's smile faded, just a little. There was something in the shape of the child's features, something familiar, but not in the way he expected. "Congratulations, Mr. Johnson," the nurse said gently, her voice warm but professional. Her name badge read Carla Jennings, a woman in her early 40s with kind eyes and a steady demeanor shaped by years of witnessing both joy and heartbreak in the same room. Her dark curls were tied neatly under a cap, her posture relaxed but attentive, the kind of presence that made people feel safe even when they didn't understand why. She had seen this moment before. The pause, the hesitation. Marcus adjusted his grip slightly, forcing his expression back into something acceptable. "Yeah, thank you," he said, but his eyes didn't leave the child's face. Across the room, Vanessa lay propped against the hospital bed, her body still recovering, her hair carefully arranged despite the exhaustion, her makeup subtle but intentional, even in a moment that should have stripped everything down to truth. She looked perfect, or at least she was supposed to. Vanessa Clark had spent years becoming this version of herself, every angle refined, every flaw corrected, every detail chosen with precision. Her skin was smooth and luminous, her features balanced and symmetrical, her presence controlled down to the smallest movement. But right now, there was something missing. "Let me see him," she said softly. Marcus hesitated. Not long, but long enough. Then he stepped forward, placing the baby gently into her arms. Vanessa looked down, and for a moment, nothing happened. No smile, no tears, no instinctive warmth that most people didn't even have to think about, just silence. Her eyes scanned the child's face slowly, carefully, like she was searching for something that wasn't there, or something she wished wasn't. "Is he healthy?" she asked, her voice controlled but thinner than usual. Carla nodded immediately. "Perfectly healthy, strong heartbeat, stable vitals. He's a good baby." Perfectly healthy. The words hung in the air, but that wasn't the question Vanessa had been asking. Marcus watched her closely now, because he saw it too. That flicker, that moment of disconnect. Vanessa adjusted the blanket slightly, her fingers precise, almost mechanical. She didn't hold the baby closer, didn't lean into him. Instead, she kept a small distance, as if closeness required something she wasn't ready to give. "He looks," Marcus started, then stopped. Vanessa didn't look up. "Like a baby," she finished for him, but her tone lacked certainty. Marcus swallowed, because that wasn't what he had been about to say. Hours passed. Visitors came and went. Doctors checked vitals. Nurses adjusted machines. The world continued as if everything was exactly as it should be. But inside that room, something was quietly unraveling. Marcus stood by the window, his reflection staring back at him against the dark glass. The city lights outside stretched endlessly, a reminder of the life he had stepped into, the life he had chosen. He thought about Isabella, not with regret, not fully, but with something else, comparison. Isabella would have smiled. She would have held the baby without hesitation, without calculation, without searching for flaws or reflections. Vanessa shifted behind him. He turned. The baby was crying now, a soft but persistent sound that filled the space with something raw and undeniable. Vanessa didn't move. "Aren't you going to—" Marcus gestured slightly. She looked at him, her expression composed but distant. "He's fine." Carla stepped in gently, lifting the baby with practiced ease, rocking him softly until the crying began to fade. Marcus watched that, too closely, because something about it felt wrong. Over the next few days, the pattern repeated. Vanessa held the baby when necessary, smiled when people were watching, but when the room was empty, she withdrew. Not dramatically, not visibly to others, but enough. She avoided prolonged eye contact with the child, kept her interactions brief, controlled, and Marcus noticed. He didn't say anything at first, because he didn't want to name what he was seeing. But one night, as the baby slept quietly in the bassinet beside them, Marcus spoke. "You don't seem attached." Vanessa's eyes flickered toward him, then back to the child. "I just need time," she said. Marcus nodded slowly, but deep down, he knew that wasn't it. Because attachment didn't look like this. It didn't look like distance. It didn't look like someone avoiding their own reflection. Back in her apartment, miles away from the life Marcus had chosen, Isabella sat in silence, her phone resting in her hand. Another message, another photo. This time, it was the baby. She stared at it longer than she had at anything else, and then her expression changed. Not shock, not sadness, recognition. A slow, quiet understanding settled into her chest, heavier than anything she had felt before. The child wasn't just different, he was the truth. They couldn't hide. Marcus told himself it would pass, but the longer he looked at his son, the less he recognized the life he had built. The house that once felt like a reward now felt too quiet, its polished floors and wide glass windows reflecting a kind of emptiness Marcus couldn't ignore anymore. Every surface was perfect, clean, expensive, untouched, but nothing in it felt lived in. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was watching. Marcus stood in the living room, one hand resting against the cold marble counter, his eyes fixed on the bassinet across the room. The baby was awake, small fingers curling and uncurling slowly, his gaze unfocused but present. There was nothing wrong with him, nothing weak, nothing broken. And yet, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling. "It's just a phase," he muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. "He'll grow into it." But the words didn't settle, they floated, empty. Across the room, Vanessa sat on the edge of the couch, her posture flawless as always, her legs crossed neatly, her hands resting gently in her lap. She looked like she belonged in a magazine, not a living room with a crying child. Her hair fell perfectly around her shoulders, her skin smooth and untouched, her expression composed, but distant. She wasn't looking at the baby, she was looking past him. "You should pick him up," Marcus said, his tone sharper than he intended. Vanessa didn't move. "He's fine," she replied calmly. The baby let out a soft cry. Marcus's jaw tightened. "He's been crying for 5 minutes." Vanessa sighed quietly, as if the sound itself was an inconvenience. "I fed him. I changed him. He's not in pain," she said, her voice controlled but edged with impatience. "Not every sound needs a reaction." Marcus stared at her. Because that wasn't what he was reacting to. It wasn't the crying, it was the absence. Days turned into weeks, and the tension didn't fade. It settled, embedding itself into every room, every conversation, every silence. Marcus started noticing things he hadn't wanted to see before. Vanessa avoided holding the baby for too long, avoided prolonged eye contact, avoided moments that couldn't be controlled. And when people visited, she performed. Perfect mother, perfect wife, perfect life. But the second they left, the mask slipped. Marcus watched it happen one afternoon when Dr. Helen Strauss came for a routine postnatal check. Dr. Strauss was in her early 50s, a composed woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a low bun, her posture straight and her voice calm in a way that immediately demanded attention. Her eyes were sharp, observant, the kind that had seen too many versions of "everything is fine" to believe it without proof. She had built her career not just on medical knowledge, but on reading what people didn't say. She examined the baby carefully, her hands steady, her expression neutral. "Strong reflexes, healthy weight, he's doing very well," she said. Marcus nodded, forcing a small smile. Vanessa smiled too, perfectly. But Dr. Strauss didn't look at Vanessa. She looked at the space between Vanessa and the child. "Are you getting enough rest?" the doctor asked gently. Vanessa hesitated, just for a second. "I'm fine," she said. Dr. Strauss held her gaze a moment longer than necessary, then nodded. But Marcus saw it, that flicker of doubt. After the doctor left, the house fell back into its usual silence. Vanessa stood by the window, her reflection sharp against the glass. Marcus sat across from her, and for the first time, he didn't recognize her. "You don't like him," Marcus said suddenly. The words landed heavier than he expected. Vanessa turned slowly. Her expression didn't break. "That's not true." Marcus stood up, his frustration finally surfacing. "Then why don't you hold him?" he asked. "Why don't you look at him?" Vanessa's eyes hardened slightly. "I do." "No," Marcus said, shaking his head. "You don't." Silence stretched between them, tight, uncomfortable. Vanessa exhaled slowly, her composure slipping just enough to reveal something beneath it. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "Then explain it to me," Marcus snapped. But she didn't, because there was nothing she could say without saying everything. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the soft breathing of the baby filling the room with a rhythm that felt too real to ignore. His mind kept replaying every moment, every detail, every small thing that didn't add up. The face, the reactions, the distance. And for the first time, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Uncertainty. Not about the child, not fully, about himself. At 2:17 a.m., Marcus sat up, reached for his phone, scrolled through contacts he hadn't touched in months, and stopped. Isabella. His thumb hovered, because calling her meant something. It meant admitting something wasn't right. It meant facing a version of himself he had already tried to leave behind. The room felt smaller, the silence louder, the truth closer. Marcus inhaled slowly, then pressed call. The phone rang, once, twice, and in that moment, Marcus realized something that made his chest tighten. He wasn't calling her for answers. He was calling her because deep down, he knew she already had them. Marcus didn't expect the truth to come from the one person he thought he had already erased. The call connected on the fourth ring. Each second before that stretched longer than it should have, his grip tightening around the phone, his jaw clenched as if he could hold himself together through tension alone. The house was silent again, the kind of silence that had started to feel suffocating, broken only by the faint breathing of the baby in the next room. Then, "Hello?" Isabella's voice, calm, steady, unchanged. Marcus didn't speak immediately, because suddenly everything he had rehearsed in his head felt small. "Isabella," he said finally, his voice lower than usual, stripped of the confidence he had worn like armor for months. "Something's wrong." On the other end, there was no panic, no rush, just quiet. "The boy," Marcus continued, swallowing hard, "he doesn't look like us." Silence, a long one, long enough to make him uncomfortable, long enough to make him realize she wasn't surprised. Then Isabella spoke. "Do you remember high school?" Marcus frowned, his brows pulling together. "That's not what I'm talking about." "I know," she said softly, "but answer the question." Marcus exhaled sharply, pacing slowly across the room, his reflection flickering in the dark glass of the window. "Yeah," he muttered, "of course I remember." But even as he said it, something in his chest tightened, because remembering wasn't the same as facing. "You don't recognize him," Isabella continued, her tone unchanged, "because you never accepted who you were." Marcus stopped, completely. "What?" he said, the word sharper than he intended. But Isabella didn't react to the tone. "You changed everything," she went on. "Your life, your image, the people around you, the way you speak, the way you dress, the way you carry yourself." Each word landed with precision, not emotional, not aggressive, just true. "But you forgot one thing," she said. Marcus didn't breathe. "You can't change what's real." The silence that followed was heavier than anything Marcus had felt in that house, because for the first time, he wasn't looking at his life from the outside. He was looking at himself. "What are you saying?" he asked finally, his voice quieter now, almost uncertain. Isabella didn't hesitate. "The child isn't the problem," she said. A pause. "You are." Marcus let out a short, disbelieving laugh, but it didn't hold. "Don't do that," he snapped. "Don't make this about me. I'm talking about my son." "No," Isabella replied calmly. "You're talking about what you expected him to be." Marcus opened his mouth to respond, stopped, because he knew. She was right. Across the room, the baby stirred softly, a small sound that broke the tension just enough to make it real again. Marcus turned his head slightly, his eyes falling on the bassinet. For a moment, he saw it differently. Not a mistake, not a problem, a reflection. "You don't understand," Marcus said, his voice lower now, defensive but weaker. "He doesn't look like us, not like Vanessa." On the other end, Isabella exhaled slowly. "Exactly," she said. Marcus frowned again, confusion replacing frustration. "What does that mean?" Miles away, Isabella sat by her window, the city lights casting soft shadows across her face. Her posture was relaxed, her expression composed, but her eyes held something deeper now. Clarity. "Marcus," she said quietly, "do you remember how you looked back then?" He didn't answer. "You used to hate your own reflection," she continued. "You used to say you didn't belong where you came from, that you were meant for something better." Marcus clenched his jaw. "I am better now," he said, more sharply than he meant to, but the words sounded hollow. "Are you?" Isabella asked. The question wasn't loud, but it hit harder than anything she had said so far. Marcus didn't respond, because suddenly, he wasn't sure. "You think you upgraded your life," Isabella continued, her voice steady, controlled, "but all you did was build something that looks good from the outside." Marcus turned away from the bassinet, pacing again, faster this time. "That's not true." "Then why are you calling me?" she asked. The question stopped him cold, because there was no answer that didn't expose something. He started, then stopped, because the truth was simple. He didn't know what was real anymore. And Vanessa? Isabella asked, her voice softer now. Marcus hesitated. What about her? Does she look at him? Isabella asked. The question lingered, because Marcus already knew the answer. No, he admitted quietly. Another pause. And you still think the problem is the child? Marcus closed his eyes, because everything he had been avoiding was now standing in front of him, clear, unavoidable. In the silence that followed, Isabella leaned back slightly, her voice lowering just enough to carry weight. You didn't leave me because I wasn't enough, she said. Marcus's eyes opened slowly. You left because I reminded you of who you used to be. The words hit, hard. And now, she continued, you built a life where everything looks perfect, except the one thing you can't control. Marcus's gaze drifted back to the baby, and that's the only thing that's real. Marcus said nothing, because for the first time since he had walked away, he had nothing left to argue with. Marcus, Isabella said softly, her tone not cruel, not bitter, just final. You didn't escape your past. A pause. You just gave it a new face. The line went quiet. Marcus lowered the phone slowly, his hand trembling just enough to notice, because everything he had built, everything he had chosen, everything he had believed was starting to crack. And for the first time, he didn't know how to fix it. Marcus thought the hardest part was realizing the truth. But the real damage began when he tried to live with it. Months passed, and the silence inside the house didn't fade. It deepened, settling into the walls, the furniture, the space between every word left unsaid. The polished floors still reflected light perfectly, the glass windows still stretched wide and clean, but something underneath it all had shifted beyond repair. What once felt like success now felt staged, like a performance no one believed anymore. Marcus Johnson looked the same on the outside. Sharp suits, controlled posture, the same confident walk he had perfected. But the way he carried himself had changed in subtle ways. His shoulders were tighter, his gaze less steady, his patience thinner. The version of himself he had built was still there, but it was starting to crack. Vanessa saw it. She didn't confront it directly. She never did. Instead, she adjusted. Vanessa Clark had always been someone who adapted before things collapsed. That was how she survived before, watching, calculating, rebuilding herself piece by piece until she became someone the world couldn't ignore. But control had always been her strength, and now control was slipping. She stood in the hallway one afternoon, watching Marcus through the reflection of the glass door, her expression unreadable. Her posture remained perfect, her movements precise, but her eyes, sharp, analytical, tracked every detail. He was late again, not for work, for home. You've been distracted, she said that evening, her voice calm but edged with something colder. Marcus didn't look up from his phone. I've been busy. Vanessa stepped closer, her heels clicking softly against the floor, each step measured. You're never this busy, she said. Marcus exhaled slowly, irritation surfacing. What do you want me to say? Vanessa's gaze held his, unblinking. The truth. He looked at her then, really looked. And for a moment, the tension between them was undeniable. But Marcus looked away first, because the truth wasn't something he was ready to say out loud. Her name was Tasha Reynolds. She wasn't part of Vanessa's world. She wasn't polished. She wasn't curated. And that was exactly why Marcus noticed her. Tasha was in her early 30s, a black woman with deep brown skin and a natural confidence that didn't need to be constructed. Her hair was worn in thick, unapologetic curls that framed her face without precision, her body strong, grounded, her presence warm in a way that felt real. She worked as a project coordinator at the company Marcus had been placed into, a role that required organization, patience, and the ability to deal with people without losing herself. She didn't try to impress him, didn't adjust her tone, didn't treat him like someone above her, and Marcus was drawn to that. At first, it was just conversation, small moments, passing comments, but then it became something else, something easier, because Tasha didn't remind him of who he used to be. She didn't mirror it back at him. She just accepted what she saw. And for a man who had spent months trying to escape himself, that felt like relief. Vanessa noticed the change before she found the proof. She always did. It wasn't obvious. Marcus was careful, but not careful enough. One night, as he stepped into the shower, his phone lit up on the counter. A message. Vanessa didn't rush, didn't panic. She walked over slowly, her movements controlled, her expression neutral. She picked up the phone, read it, and for the first time in a long time, her composure broke. Just slightly. Miss you already. 2 words, simple, clear. Vanessa set the phone down exactly where she found it. Then she stepped back. Because this wasn't about emotion. This was about decision. The divorce papers came a week later. Marcus stared at them, the irony not lost on him. Same table, same placement, same cold finality. You're serious, he said, his voice lower than usual. Vanessa stood across from him, her posture unchanged, her expression calm in a way that felt distant. I don't repeat myself, she replied. Marcus let out a short breath, shaking his head. So that's it? After everything? Vanessa tilted her head slightly. After everything? She repeated. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the hallway, where the faint sound of the child's breathing could be heard through the partially open door. You mean after you built a life you couldn't even live in? She said quietly. Marcus didn't respond, because again, she wasn't wrong. The house didn't feel like home anymore. Not to him, not to her. And the child grew in the middle of it. Not neglected, not abused, but not loved the way he should have been. Because love required something neither of them had. Acceptance. Across the city, Isabella's life moved in a different direction. Not dramatically, not overnight, but steadily. She had reduced her hours at the grocery store, focusing more on her bookkeeping work, slowly building a client base that relied on her consistency and attention to detail. Her apartment was still small, still simple, but it felt different now. Lighter. There was no tension in the air, no waiting, no silence that needed to be filled. And then there was Daniel Hayes. Daniel was not the kind of man people noticed immediately. He stood at average height, his build lean but strong, his skin a warm brown tone that carried a softness in contrast to his quiet confidence. His hair was kept short, his beard neatly shaped but not overly maintained, and his eyes, dark, steady, held a calmness that came from someone who had already faced enough of life to stop trying to control it. He worked as a physical therapist, a job that required patience, empathy, and the ability to understand people without needing them to explain everything. He didn't try to impress Isabella. He simply saw her. And that was enough. Back in the house he once believed was everything, Marcus sat alone, the divorce papers still in front of him. The silence was louder now, because this time there was no one left to blame. And for the first time, Marcus understood something he had avoided for too long. You can build the perfect life, but if it isn't real, it will eventually collapse. Marcus didn't lose everything in one moment. He lost it slowly, piece by piece, until one day there was nothing left to hold on to. The house was quieter now than it had ever been before. Not the tense silence that once filled the space when Vanessa still lived there, but a hollow, echoing emptiness that made every step feel misplaced. Half the furniture was gone, the walls stripped of the carefully curated art that had once made the place feel important. What remained looked less like a home and more like a shell, something that had once meant something, but didn't anymore. Marcus sat at the same dining table, the one where the divorce papers had been placed, staring at nothing in particular. His suit jacket hung loosely over the back of his chair, his sleeves rolled up, his posture no longer sharp or composed. There were faint lines on his face now, not from age, but from something heavier, regret maybe, or realization. Across the room, the small bassinet had been replaced with a toddler bed. The boy was almost 3 now. His name was Elijah. Elijah Johnson was a quiet child, observant in a way that felt older than his years. His skin was warm brown, his hair tightly coiled and thick, his features carrying a mixture of both his parents, but not the version they had tried to present to the world. His eyes were large and thoughtful, always watching, always learning, but rarely demanding attention. He didn't cry often. He didn't need to, because children learned quickly what wouldn't be answered. Marcus watched him from across the room as Elijah sat on the floor, stacking small wooden blocks with careful precision. There was no laughter, no background noise of a home filled with warmth, just quiet concentration. And something about that hurt more than anything else. Marcus leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "Hey," he said softly. Elijah looked up, not with excitement, not with hesitation, just acknowledgement. Marcus forced a small smile. "What are you building?" Elijah glanced back at the blocks, then answered in a small, steady voice. "A house." Marcus's chest tightened. "A strong one?" he asked. Elijah nodded once. "So it doesn't break," the child added quietly. The words landed harder than they should have. Marcus looked away, because suddenly he didn't feel like the man in control anymore. Across town, in a smaller apartment filled with soft light and quiet comfort, Isabella stood by the window, her fingers wrapped loosely around a cup of coffee. The space was simple, but it was hers. Every object had purpose. Every corner felt lived in. Daniel moved behind her, his presence calm and steady as always. He didn't rush, didn't interrupt. He simply stepped close enough to exist beside her, his hand resting lightly at her back. A small gesture, but one that carried more weight than anything grand. "You're thinking again," he said gently. Isabella smiled slightly, not turning away from the window. "I used to think I lost everything," she admitted. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He didn't need to. "Now I realize," she continued softly, "I was just holding on to something that was already gone." Daniel nodded once, his gaze steady. "That happens more than people admit." Isabella turned slightly, meeting his eyes. "And you?" she asked. "What do you think people get wrong the most?" Daniel's expression didn't change, but his answer came without hesitation. "They think love is about finding something better," he said, "when it's really about recognizing what's already real." The words settled between them, simple but undeniable. Weeks later, Marcus found himself standing outside a small park, watching from a distance. He hadn't planned to come. He told himself it didn't matter, but something had pulled him there anyway. And then he saw her, Isabella. She looked different, not because she had changed who she was, but because she no longer carried the weight of trying to be enough for someone else. Her posture was relaxed, her expression lighter, her presence steady in a way Marcus had never fully appreciated before. And beside her, Daniel. Marcus watched as they sat together on a bench, speaking quietly, their conversation easy, unforced. There was no performance, no tension, no need to prove anything. Just peace. Marcus swallowed, because for the first time, he understood what he had lost. Not the version of Isabella he had convinced himself wasn't enough, but the reality of her. He looked down at Elijah, who stood beside him now, holding his hand loosely. "Do you want to go play?" Marcus asked quietly. Elijah looked toward the park, toward the other children, then back at his father. "Can I?" he asked. Marcus nodded, and as Elijah ran forward, small steps gaining confidence with each stride, Marcus stayed where he was, watching, because something inside him finally settled. Not resolution, not redemption, understanding. Across the park, Isabella glanced up briefly. Their eyes met. For a moment, time paused. No anger, no regret, just truth. Then Isabella looked away, because some chapters don't need to be revisited. Marcus exhaled slowly, his gaze following his son instead, because now he knew exactly where he belonged, not in the life he tried to build, but in the one he still had a chance to fix. He didn't lose her when he divorced her. He lost her the moment he believed he could do better. Because men like Marcus don't leave for something better, they leave for something easier to show off. And by the time they realize the difference, the woman they replaced is already the one they can never replace again. Would you take him back, if he came back? Do you think Marcus ever truly loved Isabella? Or did he only love the version of life she represented? I want to hear your opinion. Be honest.